The Republican presidential candidates in their final debate before a series of contests that could change everything.
In Arizona tonight, a grand showdown in a presidential contest that's been all over the map.
If you don't like the state of the race right now, wait a couple of weeks.
This has been like riding Space Mountain at Disney.
The Republican race could take another turn right now when the GOP candidates return to the debate stage. Rick Santorum, the late contender, says it's a two-man duel now, and he'll be the one left standing.
I stand here to be the conservative alternative to Barack Obama.
Mitt Romney, the long-distance runner, says every rival that's threatened him has made him stronger.
My conservatism is to the core.
Newt Gingrich, the determined challenger, vowing to compete, win or lose, until the last votes are cast.
We intend to change Washington, not accommodate it.
Ron Paul, the delegate hunter, keeping his campaign going by picking and choosing his battles.
We have the message that America needs at this particular time.
The Final Four in Arizona, a state rich in presidential campaign history, a front line in the immigration wars, and the fight to bounce back from recession.
We know how to help the American people create jobs.
This has been tough for middle-income families in America.
Here in the West, they know a thing or two about fights to the finish, and this debate could change the landscape once again.
Good evening from the Mesa, Arizona Arts Center just outside of Phoenix. This is the Arizona Republican presidential debate. Tonight, the four candidates in their final debate before 14 critical contests across the country, including the primary right here in Arizona on Tuesday. Welcome. I'm John King. Arizona Republicans are here in our audience tonight. Some of them will have a chance to question the candidates, and crowds even gathering outside to watch at a viewing party here in downtown Mesa. You can also take part in this debate. Send us your questions online. On Twitter, make sure to include the hashtag CNN Debate. On Facebook at facebook.com/CNN Politics, and of course on CNNPolitics.com. It's time now to meet the 2012 Republican presidential contenders. Joining us on stage, the former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. The former Massachusetts Governor, Mitt Romney. The former Senator from Pennsylvania, Rick Santorum. And the Texas Congressman, Ron Paul. Ladies and gentlemen, the Republican candidates for President of the United States. Just before we came on the air tonight, we recited the Pledge of Allegiance. We want to ask everyone now here in the hall to rise, and at home as well. As we have the national anthem performed, it is our honor tonight to welcome the Arizona State University Symphonic Chorale.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red glare, the bombs bursting in air. It proved through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave?
Our thanks to the Arizona State University Symphonic Chorale. That was fabulous. Gentlemen, I want to ask you to take your seats. I'll take a moment now to explain to you how our debate will work tonight. I'll question the candidates as well as we'll also take some questions from members of our audience. I'll follow up and guide tonight's discussion. Candidates, we're going to try to make sure each of you get your fair amount of questions, and you'll have a minute to answer and in 30 seconds for rebuttal and follow-ups. And if you're singled out for a particular criticism, I'll make sure you get a chance to respond. Now we're going to have each of the candidates introduce themselves, and so we have more time to debate tonight. We're going to ask them to keep it short. Here's an example. I'm John King from CNN. I'm honored to be your moderator tonight, and I'm thrilled to be in a state that reminds us baseball season is just around the corner. Congressman Paul, we begin with you, sir.
I'm Congressman Ron Paul, Congressman from Texas. I am the defender of the Constitution. I'm the champion of liberty. This shows the roadmap to peace and prosperity.
I'm Rick Santorum, and we have a lot of troubles around the world, as you see, the Middle East in flames and what's going on in this country with gas prices and the economy. And I'm here to talk about a positive solution to the problems that confront this country that include everybody from the bottom up.
I'm Mitt Romney, and there was a time in this country when you knew that if you worked hard and went to school and if you learned the values of America in your home, that you could count on having a secure future and a prosperous life. That was an American promise, and it's been broken by this president. I want to restore America's promise, and I'm going to do that. That's good enough. Yeah. As George Costanza would say, when they're applauding, stop, right? Yeah.
I'm Newt Gingrich, and I've developed a program for American energy so no future president will ever bow to a Saudi king again, and so every American can look forward to $2.50 a gallon gasoline.
Gentlemen, it's good to see you again. Let's get right started on the important issues with a question from our audience. Sir, please tell us who you are and then state your question.
My name is Gilbert Fiddler from Gilbert, Arizona. And I'd like to ask this question to all the candidates if I could. Since the first time in 65 years our national debt exceeds our gross national product, what are you going to do to bring down the debt?
Thank you, sir. Senator Santorum, let's begin with you.
Yeah, thank you, Gilbert. I've put together a specific plan that cuts $5 trillion over 5 years, that spends less money each year for the next 4 years that I'll be president of the United States. So it's not inflation adjusted, it's not baseline budgeting. We're actually going to shrink the actual size of the federal budget. And we're going to do so by dealing with the real problem. And here's where I differentiate myself with everybody else, including obviously the president. I've actually have experience on tackling the toughest problems that we have in this country, and that's the growth of entitlement spending. Obviously, the first thing we need to do is repeal Obamacare. That's the one entitlement that we can get rid of. And that's a couple of $2 trillion in spending over the next 10 years. But there's bigger issues. When I was born, less than 10% of the federal budget was entitlement spending. It's now 60% of the budget. Some people have suggested that defense spending is the problem. When I was born, defense spending was 60% of the budget. It's now 17%. If you think defense spending is the problem, then you need a remedial math class to go back to. Defense spending will not be cut under my administration, but we will go after all of the means-tested entitlement programs, Medicaid, food stamps, all of those programs, and do what we did with welfare. We cut the welfare, we cut spending on welfare, froze it, and then we block granted to the states and gave them the flexibility to run that program the way they saw fit with two provisos. Number one, there would be a time limit on welfare and a work requirement. We were going to say that poverty is not a disability, that these programs need to be transitional in nature. We need to do the same thing with Medicaid. We need to do the same thing with food stamps, all of the other means-tested entitlement programs. And unlike the Paul Ryan plan, I see I'm out of time, but unlike the Paul Ryan plan, we also will deal with Medicare and Social Security, not 10 years from now. But we have to start dealing with it now because our country is facing fiscal bankruptcy.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Romney, I'm wondering if that answer satisfied you. Just in recent days, you said this, quote, if you want a fiscal conservative, you can't vote for Rick Santorum because he's not. Did he answer your questions there?
Well, I'm looking at his historic record, which voting for raising the debt ceiling 5 different times without voting for compensating cuts, voting to keep in place Davis-Bacon, which costs about $100 billion over 10 years, a whole series of votes, voting to fund Planned Parenthood, to expand the Department of Education. During his term in the Senate, spending grew by some 80% in the federal government. But I want to respond to Gilbert's question, which I think is a critical one. And that is, as you look at this country, I'm a guy who's lived in the world of business. If you don't balance your budget in business, you go out of business. So I've lived balancing budgets. I also served in the Olympics, balanced the budget there, and served in the state. And in all 4 years I was governor, we balanced the budget. Here's what I'd do at the federal level. I would divide all of the programs into 3 major places for opportunity to reduce cost. Number 1, I'm going to go through every single program and ask if we can afford it. And if not, I'm going to say, is this program so critical that it's worth borrowing money from China to pay for it? And if not, I'm going to get rid of it. Number 2, I'm going to take programs that are important, but that could be better run at the state level and send them back to the states as a block grant, and that includes Medicaid and housing vouchers and food stamps. These programs for the poor can be run more efficiently, and it can be run with less fraud and abuse at the state level. And then finally, number 3, with what's left of government, I'm going to cut the employment by 10%, and I'm going to link the pay of government workers with the pay in the private sector. Government servants shouldn't get paid more than the people who are paying taxes.
Senator, the governor singled you out. Take a few seconds.
Well, the governor talks about raising the debt ceiling. There was a debt ceiling vote this summer, and the governor was asked the question whether he would have voted to raise the debt ceiling ultimately, and he said yes, because government has to pay their bills. We can't default ultimately. What happened the 12 years I was in the United States Senate, we went from the debt to GDP ratio, which is now over 100%. When I came to the Senate, it was 68% of GDP. When I left the Senate, it was 64% of GDP. So government as the size of the economy went down when I was in the United States Senate. Sure, I had some votes. Look, I think we all have had votes that I look back on. I wish I wouldn't have voted to No Child Left Behind. You're right, it led to education spending. That's why I've said that we need to cut and eliminate No Child Left Behind and education funding from the federal government, move it back to the local level where it belongs, where parents and local communities can deal with that. But if you look at my record on spending, on taking on entitlements, never having voted for an appropriation bill increase, you look at my record of never having raised taxes. Governor Romney raised $700 million in taxes and fees in Massachusetts. I never voted to raise taxes. Governor Romney even today suggested raising taxes on the top 1%, adopting the Occupy Wall Street rhetoric. I'm not going to adopt that rhetoric. I'm going to represent 100% of Americans. We're not raising taxes on anybody.
All right, Governor, please, quickly, I want to bring the congressman and the speaker into the conversation, but respond.
There were so many misrepresentations there, it's going to take me a little while. Number 1, I said today that we're going to cut taxes on everyone across the country by 20%, including the top 1%. So that's number 1. Number 2, I said, yes, we should increase the debt ceiling in this last vote, but only if we have a cut, cap, and balance provision put in place. Only in that case, and therefore I did not agree with the deal that was done in Washington. That was the wrong way to go. And finally, Senator, during your term in Congress, the years you've been there, government has doubled in size. You voted to raise the debt ceiling 5 times without compensating cuts in spending. In my view, we should not raise the debt ceiling again until we get compensating cuts in spending. A cut, cap, and balance approach must be taken.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, join the conversation, address Gilbert's question, and if you so choose, address some criticism you've received on this issue from this state's senior senator campaigning for Governor Romney. He questioned your credentials on fiscal conservatism. And he said, when you were the speaker, earmarking became an art.
Well, when I was speaker, as I'm sure he remembers, we balanced the budget for 4 consecutive years for the only time in his lifetime. So I think that's a good place to start with Gilbert's question. We're meeting tonight on the 280th anniversary of George Washington's birth. You go back and look at the Founding Fathers, they'd have had very clear messages. Hamilton would have said, you have to have jobs and economic growth to get back to a balanced budget. You're never going to balance the budget on the back of a highly unemployed country.